Russian military casualties have reached levels that dwarf official government acknowledgments. By June 2025, estimates suggest that over 790,000 Russian military personnel have been killed or injured in the conflict, a figure that the Kremlin desperately tries to conceal. Missing in action numbers are estimated around 48,000, representing soldiers whose fates remain unknown to their families and whose disappearances create lasting uncertainty for thousands of Russian households. Russian authorities strictly control information about military casualties, forbidding local media from reporting death tolls and prosecuting journalists who attempt to investigate casualty figures independently. These military losses have accelerated Russia's existing demographic crisis into a full-scale catastrophe. Over 800,000 people have left Russia for economic or political reasons since 2022, creating a mass exodus that includes engineers, doctors, teachers, and technology workers whose skills are essential for maintaining modern economic functions. Countries including Georgia, Armenia, Kazakhstan, and European Union nations have experienced significant increases in Russian immigrants seeking to avoid military mobilization and economic instability. These immigrants often cannot return to Russia due to legal restrictions or fear of prosecution, creating permanent population losses that will affect Russian society for generations. Ukrainian civilian casualties present an equally devastating picture that reveals the systematic targeting of non-combatants throughout the conflict. Ukrainian civilian fatalities have reached 13,000 as of June 10, 2025, with the actual number likely being much higher due to ongoing investigations and areas where access remains limited. The attacks have resulted in the effective erasure of entire cities, such as Mariupol, where widespread destruction and loss of life have been documented through satellite imagery and survivor testimonies. More than 2.5 million homes across Ukraine, representing 13% of the housing stock, have been damaged or destroyed, leaving many Ukrainians in damaged homes or in buildings ill-prepared for life-threatening freezing temperatures. The energy crisis is disrupting public access to water, electricity, heating, healthcare, education, and social protection. Entire neighborhoods in cities like Kharkiv, Kherson, and Zaporizhia have been reduced to rubble, forcing residents to live in basements and bomb shelters for months at a time. The refugee crisis has scattered over 6.9 million Ukrainians across Europe and beyond, creating the largest displacement of people in Europe since World War II. Poland has welcomed the largest number of Ukrainian refugees, hosting approximately 956,635 as of December 15, 2023. Ukrainian families face impossible choices between staying in dangerous areas to maintain their homes and livelihoods, or abandoning everything to seek safety elsewhere. Many refugees live in temporary accommodations that were never designed for long-term habitation, creating psychological stress and uncertainty about their futures. The psychological trauma affecting an entire generation of children who have grown up during wartime will require decades of specialized treatment and support. Ukrainian children have experienced constant air raid sirens, displacement from their homes, separation from family members, and witnessing destruction of their communities. Many children suffer from sleep disorders, anxiety, and developmental problems that will require long-term therapeutic intervention. Schools across Ukraine operate in bomb shelters and underground facilities, creating learning environments that reflect the constant threat of attack. Russian children also face psychological challenges as family members deploy to combat zones or disappear during mobilization campaigns. Russian families experience the stress of not knowing whether their relatives will return safely, while government restrictions on information make it difficult to obtain accurate updates about military operations. The secrecy surrounding military casualties means many Russian families live in uncertainty about missing relatives for months or years. Families have been torn apart across both countries, creating lasting social wounds that extend far beyond immediate military impacts. Russian mothers have organized protest movements against mobilization policies, despite facing arrest and prosecution for their activities. These protests represent rare public dissent in Russia and demonstrate how military casualties affect civilian populations who lack official channels for expressing their concerns. Ukrainian families work to rebuild their lives from nothing after losing homes, businesses, and community connections that took generations to establish. The demographic impacts of this conflict will shape both societies for decades to come. Russia faces labor shortages, population decline, and the loss of educated professionals that will constrain economic growth and social development. Ukraine confronts the challenge of rebuilding destroyed communities, while many of its most productive citizens remain scattered across other countries. Yet while these human costs mounted across both nations, another revolution was quietly unfolding that would prove equally transformative. The methods being used to fight this war were fundamentally different from any conflict in human history, establishing entirely new rules for how battles would be won and lost. The technology war reshaping modern combat. Commercial satellites provided intelligence capabilities that rivaled the most sophisticated military reconnaissance systems available to major powers. Companies like Planet Labs and Maxar Technologies delivered hourly imagery updates that allowed Ukrainian forces to track Russian troop movements, identify supply convoys, and monitor construction activities across occupied territories. These commercial satellite constellations offered coverage that exceeded what traditional military satellites could provide through their scheduled orbital patterns. Ukrainian commanders received intelligence briefings based on satellite imagery that was often more current than information available to Russian forces about their own operations. The satellite intelligence revolution democratized battlefield awareness in ways that fundamentally altered military planning and execution. Ukrainian forces used commercial satellite imagery to identify Russian ammunition depots, command centers, and defensive positions that became targets for precision strikes. The constant surveillance made it nearly impossible for Russian forces to conduct large-scale troop movements without detection, forcing them to adopt defensive strategies that limited their operational flexibility. Russian military planners found themselves operating under conditions where their adversaries possessed superior situational awareness despite having significantly smaller intelligence budgets. Drone technology transformed battlefield dynamics by making $500 quadcopters as dangerous as million-dollar missile systems. Ukrainian forces adapted commercial drones for military purposes through modifications that cost hundreds of dollars, while achieving effects that previously required expensive guided munitions. These modified drones could deliver explosive payloads with precision targeting that allowed small Ukrainian units to destroy Russian armored vehicles, artillery positions, and supply convoys. The proliferation of drone technology meant that individual soldiers could conduct strikes that previously required coordination between multiple military units and specialized equipment. The drone revolution extended beyond tactical applications to strategic operations that influenced the broader conflict trajectory. Ukrainian forces developed long-range drone capabilities that could strike targets hundreds of kilometers inside Russian territory using relatively simple technology and minimal resources. Russian forces launched 267 drones in a single night during February 2025. Demonstrating how drone warfare had become central to military operations rather than a supplementary capability. The mass production and deployment of drones created new logistical challenges, as both sides required thousands of replacement units monthly to sustain operations. Artificial intelligence began selecting targets and coordinating attacks with minimal human oversight, introducing automation into warfare decisions that previously required extensive human analysis. Ukrainian forces integrated AI systems that could identify Russian military vehicles, personnel concentrations, and equipment signatures from drone footage in real time. These AI systems processed vast amounts of visual data and recommended targets based on predetermined criteria, allowing Ukrainian commanders to execute strikes more rapidly than traditional targeting processes permitted. The speed of AI-assisted targeting created tactical advantages that forced Russian forces to adopt dispersed formations and irregular movement patterns. Cyber warfare campaigns targeted everything from power grids to individual smartphones, creating vulnerabilities that extended far beyond traditional military targets. Russian cyber operations attempted to disable Ukrainian government websites, disrupt communication networks, and interfere with civilian infrastructure, including electrical distribution systems and water treatment facilities. Ukrainian cyber capabilities responded with attacks against Russian government networks, banking systems, and industrial control systems that managed critical infrastructure. The cyber domain became a parallel battlefield where operations occurred continuously rather than during specific military campaigns. Social media became both a weapon and a battlefield that shaped global public opinion and influenced international support for the conflict. Ukrainian government officials used social media platforms to document Russian attacks, share battlefield updates, and maintain international attention on their situation. Russian information operations attempted to spread disinformation about Ukrainian military capabilities, civilian casualties, and international support levels. The battle for narrative control occurred across multiple social media platforms, where both sides competed to influence perceptions among domestic and international audiences. Electronic warfare created an arms race that rendered some advanced Western systems temporarily obsolete, as both sides developed countermeasures against enemy capabilities. Russian forces deployed jamming systems that interfered with GPS navigation, communications equipment, and drone control signals used by Ukrainian forces. Ukrainian electronic warfare capabilities disrupted Russian communications networks and interfered with precision-guided munitions that relied on electronic navigation systems. The rapid development of electronic countermeasures forced both sides to continuously upgrade their equipment and tactics. Three-dimensional printing and rapid manufacturing changed battlefield logistics by enabling local production of needed equipment and replacement parts. Ukrainian forces used 3D printing to produce drone components, repair parts for Western equipment, and specialized tools required for military operations. The distributed manufacturing capability reduced dependence on traditional supply chains that were vulnerable to interdiction and attack. Space-based assets became legitimate military targets for the first time since the Cold War, as both sides recognized the critical importance of satellite communications and navigation systems. The targeting of space assets represented a significant escalation in the types of infrastructure considered acceptable military targets. This technological transformation established new warfare paradigms that extended far beyond military applications. The same innovations that revolutionized combat operations also disrupted global systems that billions of people depended on for their most basic needs. The global food crisis hidden in plain sight. Food shortages spreading across continents revealed how a European conflict could threaten basic survival for populations thousands of miles from any battlefield. Ukraine and Russia's combined agricultural exports fed over 400 million people globally before February 2022, making these two countries absolutely critical to international food security. Ukraine alone accounted for approximately 10% of global wheat exports, while Russia contributed another 18% of world wheat supplies. Together, these nations provided nearly 30% of internationally traded wheat, along with significant portions of corn, barley, and sunflower oil that reached markets across Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. The naval blockade implemented by Russian forces trapped approximately 20 million tons of Ukrainian grain in Black Sea ports during the critical harvest period of 2022. Ukrainian farmers had successfully completed their spring planting and summer harvest despite ongoing military operations. But the grain sat in storage facilities and port terminals, while ships could not safely navigate the Black Sea due to naval mines and active combat operations. The trapped grain represented enough food to feed tens of millions of people for months. Yet it remained inaccessible to international markets that desperately needed these supplies. Port facilities in Odessa, Kornomorsk, and other Ukrainian coastal cities operated at minimal capacity, while global food prices increased dramatically. Fertilizer shortages created by sanctions against Russia and Belarus reduced global crop yields by approximately 15%, compounding the direct supply disruptions caused by the conflict itself. Russia and Belarus together accounted for about 40% of global potash exports, a critical component in fertilizer production that farmers worldwide depend on to maximize their crop yields. The sanctions designed to pressure these countries economically had unintended consequences for agricultural production across continents, as farmers from Brazil to India struggled to obtain adequate fertilizer supplies for their planting seasons. The reduced fertilizer availability forced farmers to choose between paying dramatically higher prices or accepting lower crop yields that would contribute to food shortages. Food price spikes triggered political instability across Africa and the Middle East as governments struggled to maintain affordable food supplies for their populations. Wheat prices increased by over 50% in international markets during the first 6 months of the conflict, while corn and cooking oil prices reached levels that made basic nutrition unaffordable for millions of people in developing countries. Countries including Egypt, Lebanon, and Tunisia, which imported substantial portions of their grain from Ukraine and Russia, faced immediate crisis conditions as their traditional suppliers became unreliable. The price increases created social tensions that manifested in protests, strikes, and political upheaval across multiple countries simultaneously. The grain corridor agreements negotiated through Turkish and United Nations mediation became diplomatic chess pieces that both sides manipulated to achieve broader political objectives. These agreements allowed limited Ukrainian grain exports through carefully monitored sea lanes, but the arrangements remained vulnerable to political tensions and military developments that had nothing to do with humanitarian food assistance. Russia periodically suspended participation in the grain corridor agreements when seeking leverage in other aspects of the conflict, demonstrating how food assistance had become subordinated to military strategy. Climate change combined with war disruptions to create perfect storm conditions for famine across multiple regions simultaneously. Drought conditions in East Africa, flooding in Pakistan, and extreme weather events in other agricultural regions occurred at the same time as the Ukrainian grain shortage, multiplying the impact of each individual crisis. Countries that might have managed one agricultural disruption found themselves unable to cope with simultaneous challenges to their food security. Alternative supply chains emerged as countries scrambled to replace Ukrainian and Russian agricultural imports, permanently reshaping global food trade patterns. India increased wheat exports significantly to fill gaps in international markets, while countries including Argentina and Australia expanded their agricultural export programs to meet increased demand. These alternative suppliers often charged higher prices than Ukrainian and Russian exporters had previously offered, creating permanent increases in food costs for importing countries. The development of new trade relationships also required infrastructure investments and logistical arrangements that took months to establish, while populations faced immediate food shortages. Food became a weapon of war as both sides manipulated agricultural exports to achieve political and military objectives. Russia used its grain exports as leverage in negotiations with countries that might otherwise support Ukraine, offering discounted food supplies in exchange for diplomatic neutrality or support. Ukraine sought to maintain its agricultural exports as a source of foreign currency revenue needed to fund its military operations, creating tensions between humanitarian needs and wartime financing requirements. The hunger crisis extended this conflict's impact to every continent through food price increases that affected even countries with minimal direct involvement in the war. Agricultural commodity markets operate globally, meaning that supply disruptions in one region immediately influence prices worldwide. Countries in Latin America, Asia, and Africa experienced food inflation that reduced living standards and created social tensions despite having no direct stake in the territorial disputes that caused the original conflict.